家好，欢迎来到瑞视频，我是 Jennifer。美国少数族裔媒体服务中心召开线上研讨会，下面请看来自美国新闻速递的详细报道。
The recall grows out of a movement more than 100 years ago, pioneered in California, called the progressive movement, but not progressive with a small p, as we use it today, but progressive with a capital P, that was meant to challenge the way we hold our leaders accountable in the American constitutional system. We've always, until the late 1800s, the American model was really pretty simple, which is we hold elections at regularly scheduled dates. If you just wait around, there's going to be an election and it's going to be the date you're expecting. And in addition, we set people against each other to hold each other accountable. So the Congress would hold the president accountable. The legislature would hold the governor accountable. But by the late 1800s, there was a movement that said that is not enough, that politicians can't be held accountable by other politicians. They have to also be held accountable directly by the people. And in California, much of this was around opposition to the power of the Southern Pacific Railroad that used to wander around the halls of Sacramento telling legislators and statewide officials what to do. And there was a feeling that the American system of regular elections might not be enough to let the people have what was called direct democracy. And the main pillars of direct democracy in the late 1800s and early 1900s did not include the recall. The recall was an add-on. There was the initiative and there was the referendum. The initiative, which allowed the people to make a law, and a referendum which allowed the people to eliminate a law. But in the city of Los Angeles in 1903, a local progressive movement led by a socialist doctor, wealthy philanthropist named John Randolph Haynes pursued a third piece called the recall, which was way more exciting than the initiative and the referendum, because the recall struck fear in the hearts of all elected officials. And in 1903, the Los Angeles Charter included both the initiative and the referendum, but also something new called the recall. And the recall allowed the voters by petition to put the matter of the survival of an elected official onto the ballot and to remove that elected official. Well, it became very popular. It spread around California, around local governments. It actually spread around the whole West. And in 1911, California's voters adopted all three in a charter, in a constitutional amendment, Measure 8 in 1911, which put the initiative, the referendum, and the recall into the Constitution. Unfortunately, they did not adopt a little quirk that the LA Charter had, which is that the replacement election in a Los Angeles City recall has a runoff to make sure that a majority winner is selected. That was never put into the state constitution. So in 1911, we had this provision that got very rarely used, almost never used at the state level, but it turned out to be wildly popular throughout California, in local governments, in school boards, city councils. I worked at LA City Hall many years ago, and 2 or 3 of the council members I knew very well were facing possible recalls, and I got a feeling right up close and personal how terrifying recalls are to elected officials. The problem with a lot of things like the recall and a lot of progressive reforms, though, is one I want to bring to your attention. When you change the rules and create sudden surprise elections with unusual rules that are different from the regular rules, you run the risk of really narrowing participation by especially marginalized communities who may not have access to the tools and information to participate. This was one of the underlying flaws of the whole progressive movement. They wanted to have local elections be nonpartisan, and they got that. So people didn't know which party you were in, and for a lot of voters, that's a really important cue. They wanted elections held in odd-numbered years rather than even-numbered years, so the parties wouldn't be involved. Well, then, people weren't getting mobilized by the political parties. And the recall turns out to be something that, needless to say, has everybody confused, and therefore we have an incredibly important job to make up for the flaws of those progressive reforms that sometimes limit people's participation. So when this was designed, they designed it in a very strange way in the California Constitution. They put a very small limit on the number of signatures required to remove a state officer, 12%, which is a not impossible bar to reach, although a difficult one. And then the election gets set by the legislature after a series of steps involving the Secretary of State. And these are movable dates. These can be at different times. And as you know, the one that was picked was September 14th. As it turned out, a movement was created to remove Governor Newsom from office. This was one of, according to Dr. Weber's own statistics, 179 attempted recalls against state officials in California. Only 11 in 110 years got enough signatures to get to the ballot. But because a judge provided a pandemic-related extension to those who were gathering the signatures of 4 months, they were able to easily surmount it with over 1.5 million valid signatures. And therefore, it was going to go on to the ballot. Still, very few people were paying attention to this outside political reporters and others. One very important decision that was made by the state government, though, that is going to really help this a great deal, was to circulate absentee ballots to every registered voter in California. I think without that, the possibility of this being a high turnout election would have gone right out the window. I think it would have been very, very difficult. That was, I think, a great blow for democracy and equal access in California. But I'm here to tell you, this election really didn't begin until about 10 days ago. Now, have you ever had an election that began 10 days ago and is going to take place in 2.5 weeks? Because we're used to the regular model, November, even numbered year. How many of you have already heard speculation about who's going to be the presidential candidates in 2024? We're already talking about the congressional races. You're going to be hearing about nothing but that. I have finally figured out what this is like. What this is like is a European election called a snap election, where parliament is dissolved and there is a sudden election held 3 to 4 weeks later. We have no training for this. Our system does not provide any training for this, which is why I hate to put this all on your shoulders. Like PBI, your media organizations are going to be called upon to make up for the fact that we're facing something people have literally never seen, at least since the 2003 election. But thank God that the absentee ballots were sent directly to the voters, because at that moment, the starting gun was fired that there's actually an election coming. Unfortunately, and here's where Dr. Weber will be able to answer all of the questions people have, some of which are reasonable questions, some of which are of the category of, space aliens coming in and looking at my ballot and painting it purple and then, turning it into a chicken or something like that. You get all kinds of questions going on. But this should be the simplest election you'll ever see, right? Because it only has 2 items on it. And yet almost every one of my friends is completely and totally confused by this election. In my mind, by the way, I think they're paying attention to the wrong measure on the ballot, which is why they're getting confused. But put that to the side for the moment. The 2 questions are, shall Gavin Newsom be recalled as governor of California? Now, I, by the way, would not have written it that way as a political scientist. I think yes should be to keep the governor and no should be to remove the governor, so that you could say yes for Newsom, no for Newsom. But instead, because the question has to be asked this way, it's asked no. If you vote no, you're supporting the governor. If you vote yes, you're opposing the governor. I'm here to tell you, sometime in the next 2.5 weeks, someone is going to put out an ad or mail in communities that are just starting to be outreach to, that is going to flip that around in order to get people to vote incorrectly. So the first thing is, No is for Newsom, yes is against Newsom, even though that's kind of counterintuitive. Now, that we can probably explain to everybody. But then there's a second measure, which I tell you as a political scientist, I think is, I don't know what they were thinking 110 years ago, why we needed to elect a replacement candidate on the same ballot. It is incredibly easy to become a candidate for governor on the replacement ballot. I keep regretting that I didn't do it in 2003. I probably should have done it this time because it would have looked great on my resume to say I had run for governor of California. It costs like almost nothing to do this. So we have 46 candidates. I won't go through anything about the candidates except to say that this list of candidates would not look the same if the replacement election was a new election held several months after the recall election. You'd have a whole array of very established candidates running if the governor had been recalled and then it was an open seat. Now it's people who say, hey, this is great, I'm going to take a flyer. And then there's a few people who are kind of significant elected officials. And then you've got, I won't run through the names of the goofiest ones, but the voters are confused because they're wondering, is there a connection between my ability to vote on the first measure on the second measure? Well, there's no connection. You can vote on the first one, you can vote on the second one. If you want to, heck, you could send both of them in blank for all I care, and it's still legal. But you're not blocked from voting for the replacement based on what happened on the first one. All that you're blocked from is your choice of replacement having a chance to win depending on the result of the first one. So then, of course, you have a lot of people who are sitting up all night deciding how to vote on the replacement election, which strikes me as, there's a lot of things I'd like to do with my life. And I don't think I want to spend excessive hours thinking about that particular question because all the strategic reasoning people are doing is just going to make them crazy because it's a logic circuit that can really make you nuts. The real ball game, of course, is the first measure because that's the one, that's the history maker, is the first one. And the second one's going to turn out however it's going to turn out. So the important thing is to encourage people. I have this nightmare that friends of mine on September 15th are going to call me and say, Rafe, I have finally figured out how to vote on the replacement election. And I'm going to say, that's just wonderful. The election ended yesterday. They say, yes, but at least I know how to vote. I say, okay, congratulations. People are perfectly capable, at least my friends, of agonizing over this for the next 2.5 weeks. Nothing's more important than vote however you're going to vote on two, vote on one, put the thing into, well, I always take mine to a Dropbox because it's more fun because I feel like I've gone to the voting place without having to stand in line. And I really love doing that. And according to the LA County Registrar, that's a really great thing that people just love to use. So before I take your questions, and then we're going to turn it over to Dr. Weber to answer details, just a few things to think about that are likely to happen. One is if the governor is recalled, that'll have to be certified. And that would mean that one more than 50% voted to recall the governor. If it's certified, then the governor is removed from office. The governor cannot run in the second replacement election, by the way. That's against the law. The governor can't be written in that election. So don't think that a vote for the governor is going to be counted on the write-in. The governor's gone. At which point, the replacement candidate, not with a majority, but with the most votes, will be declared governor. That could be a candidate with 15% of the vote, could easily become the governor. How long will that governor serve? Well, think about it this way. The next governor is inaugurated in January of 2023. So that's a very long period of time for the new governor to come in. Let me finish by telling you that I'm every day reading the Secretary of State's reports on the absentee ballots coming in, which are just, this is a fun election, even though as crazy as it is, because you can track the absentee ballots. And what we know about partisanship in this country right now is that you can pretty well predict who's going to win the recall based on how many Democrats versus how many Republicans and how many independents are sending in their absentee ballots. We know that the Bay Area is coming in very heavy with voters based on the Secretary of State's numbers. LA County, where a quarter to a fifth of all voters are in California, is coming in at about the average. What we do know from Political Data Inc., which sends a daily tracker out, which I am becoming addicted to, and I'm deeply upset that I didn't get mine this morning, so I have to use one that's like a day or two old, has the early absentee numbers coming in at very high levels. Whether that is sustained or not, I don't know. 3.5 million already coming in. To give you an idea of where you'd have to go to presidential in 2020, over 17 million ballots were cast in the state. It is also turning out that while Democrats are overperforming their share of the vote, older voters are the ones who are overperforming the most. 65 and older are coming in, almost 30% of their ballots are in, and I'm happy to say those over 71 are coming in at an even higher percentage. So don't mess with people over 71. I'm here to tell you they're participating at a high level. What worries me is that the voters 18 to 34 are so far coming in at a very low level. As of a few days ago, only 7% had put their ballots in. Now, I think that will change with people returning to colleges and schools, UC and Cal State alone, with hundreds of thousands of students, but there's a lot of work to be done. White voters are overrepresented in the ballots coming in, and the group that has the lowest representation coming in, according to political data, is Latino voters. Now, history shows that that will change over the coming weeks, that there will be a surge coming in, but you can't take a surge for granted. And if you want motivation about your coverage in terms of getting people the information they need, just read these numbers every day. We are tracking at PBI the younger voters every single day. We're going to put up a thermometer, and we're badgering every student organization we know in our region to get the vote out. So we can watch this like crazy. Punditry isn't going to help so much. This is actually a meat and potatoes election. You know what this election is about? Who sends their ballots in? It's not about some clever gamble, some clever trick or something like that. This is pure numerical force, and you can watch it happening. And it would be great to build that into your coverage, to say, hey, let's make up 15% here. You know, are we going to get to 15%?
This is a very, very important election, and one that all of you should, and that we're counting on you as a central piece of this election to make sure that the word gets out, that people know that there is an election taking place and that the recall is occurring, and that we want every Californian who's a registered voter to vote in this recall election. And September 24th is the date. That was the date chosen by the Lieutenant Governor to be the date of the recall. Most of you in your previous reporting know that there's a very short time frame, as was mentioned earlier, for this election. There's no time to really breathe and take a deep breath. It is truly a 100-yard dash, pretty much, in terms of getting to the finish line with this election that's there.
Dr. Weber, it's September 14th, right? You said
September 14th. I'm sorry, September 14th. Yes. And as a result, so there's very little time for breathing. 2 weeks from tomorrow, the election will take place, and as a result of that, every Californian will have the opportunity to vote. As was mentioned, a number of absentee ballots have already come in, over 3 million, maybe more, by the time we get the information for the weekend of things that came in. So this is proving to be a relatively popular election with regards to the number of ballots coming in. In some areas, we're seeing, they say they are outpacing what took place in November in terms of the amount of ballots coming in early in comparison to the same time frame as the November election. We will see. It's hard to tell. But I think because of the fact we did a couple of things this time with the recall, keep in mind that recall in 2003 had over 70% participation. So I think once the recall information gets going, people realize that they want to participate, that they want to have a say in whether or not the governor remains in office or not. And so as a result, we're hoping for a large turnout of this election. And obviously the number of absentee ballots coming in, vote by mail ballots coming in, let us know that. The couple of things that we did this time, unlike before, because of COVID, and we had passed these laws earlier, but every county didn't want to always do it, didn't want to necessarily become what we call a voter choice county, wanted to continue with their traditional method of voting. But in November, when we realized that the pandemic was upon us and we didn't want to have people standing in line close to each other for hours and hours to vote, we did want to make it convenient for everyone, those kinds of things. And we took extra measures. And so we made almost every county like a voter choice county to a certain extent, which meant every person in California received a ballot. The legislature decided that it would do a different kind of election in terms of making sure that every registered voter received a ballot in the mail. So every registered voter should have access to a ballot right now. And we saw that in the last election. It has a profound impact upon whether or not people are going to vote, because if they get a ballot that they didn't sign up to be absentee, but they got a ballot and it's a valid ballot, they're more likely to vote than they were before. We also have increased the ways that people can vote. You can either drop it in a ballot box, I did last time. I dropped it at my local library down the hill from my house. Very convenient to do so. You can track your ballot by signing up with "Where's my ballot?" and basically you know that your ballot got in and it got counted and so forth and so on. So these things make it easy for people to have some sense of engagement with the process that's there. You can basically, you can also actually go in and vote the day of the election. You can go and take your ballot to the polls, or you can actually go vote there. We also make it possible that if somehow or another you're not at your immediate precinct, you can actually register in other precincts by going in, and they can find your name and your ballot and so forth and so on. We've made it relatively simple for folks to do that. I think the large numbers that are coming in right now, because it is a situation people kind of discovered, oh my goodness, we are doing a recall. As soon as the material started indicating that a recall was going to take place, there are a lot of people asking me, has the governor already been recalled? I didn't want that to happen, they said, because they thought, well, okay, we're doing that, he's been recalled. No, the recall election has been validated to the extent that we will vote on whether or not we want to recall the governor. And so it took a while for people to realize that there's going to be an election. But I think the fact that the ballots appeared in people's boxes realized, okay, there is an election that's going to take place, and it's going to take place September 14th. I need to either turn this in now or go to the polls. The other piece, of course, is that it's a simple ballot, unlike some of our other ballots that we've had. People have often been frustrated by the size of the ballot, the number of propositions, the huge number of folks running for office in terms of Congress and city councils and all these kinds of things all wrapped up in one. This ballot basically has two questions. And people are sometimes confused by the second one, which is the replacement. But the first question asks really clearly, do you want to recall? And we put in parentheses, remove, in case someone doesn't understand it, the governor, Governor Gavin Newsom. And it's a yes, no answer. And I tell folks, be sure to vote for number one. If you have a preference for number two, you can vote for number two, but it doesn't have anything else. It doesn't ask, it doesn't try to explain things to you on the ballot. We don't have propositions where you have to try to figure out who's going to benefit from this or that or whatever. So it's a relatively simple ballot. And I think for that reason, when I run across folks, and I know my circle is always political mostly, but even in the non-political circle, when I've run across folks, they've said, oh, I got my ballot and I mailed it in. Some of them did it the same day because you didn't have to have a stamp and didn't have to have certain things there. but it also was simple. It's a yes, no answer. And some folks found that refreshing in terms of what we've seen in the past, where our ballots have had so many propositions that you get fatigued trying to deal with that and trying to deal with judges and just on and on. The ballots just become enormous. And so as a result, we're seeing a record turnout in terms of ballots being returned back to us. So we're hoping that we will have as robust a turnout as we did in 2003 with the last recall, but hopefully we'll match what we did in November with regards to the 80% turnout. Now we are hoping and pushing in terms of my office. As some of you may know, we have contacted many of your outlets, and we have advertisements in the print media, in the electronic media. We're trying to get the word out in various communities where the printout has gone a little bit less. And as a result, we want to make sure that everyone gets the message that's there, because we do know that those turnouts will sometimes be a lot less than they should be. Working hard with regards to our language communities to make sure that we have advertisements in the various languages that are there that will also be reflected in the ballots that they receive. Like I said, we hope that will happen. Now, registration. It is still time to register to vote. August the 30th, today is the last day that you can officially register online. Okay, so which means you can go online right now at the Secretary of State's office and people can register to vote. I've been on 2 or 3 outlets this morning, TV, radio, and others were emphasizing that today at 11:59 p.m. tonight is a deadline for registration online to be able to register online for the election that's coming up in September 14th. That is not, however, the last day that you can register. You can still register up until September 14th, the day of the election, because California has same day, same registration voting. So you can go in and register to vote and on September 14th and actually vote and have your vote count. You may end up with a provisional ballot because we have to verify that you are truly an eligible individual to be able to register to vote. But once that occurs, then you will be be allowed to vote. And once we validate the ballot, then of course that will be counted among the provisional ballots. But it will still nonetheless be counted and will be counted validly for the individual that's there. Several have asked about write-in candidates. I think the prior speaker mentioned that the governor cannot be a replacement candidate. He cannot be the candidate that you write. You can write his name in. It won't count though. But there will be replacement candidates. There will be write-in candidates that, in addition to the 46 we have, there's some folks who've taken out write-in provisions. And so as a result, they will be write-in candidates. We will know those candidates by, I think tomorrow is the last day, because it's 14 days before the election that you can be a write-in candidate. Once we get those verify that they are citizens and so forth and so on and eligible to run for office, then their names will be available for you to write in if you want to know. So by the 3rd of September, we will know exactly who the write-in candidates are that have been valid write-in candidates that have decided they wanted to run for governor. It is interesting. Many of your precincts have already started in terms of voting. They have already begun early voting, and it varies depending upon the area. And I know some of your outlets cover more than one county, and so because of overlap. So we're recommending that you contact your county to say, when does our voting start? Some of them have already started. In LA County has already started voting. Some of them have 11 days, some have more days in advance than others. Some have 4 or 5 days, depending on the size of the county, because some counties discovered, particularly in very remote areas, that opening up polling places 8, 9, 10 days in advance didn't work because people mostly mail their things in or bring them into the box, and so there was no one there to take to basically allow folks to vote. So every county will have a different schedule with regards to how early voting, but there will be early voting. There will be voting that will occur before September 14th. And so most of them will do weekends as well as some during the day. But all of the registrar voter offices are eligible or open for people to go vote during the normal business hours that are there. So feel free to, if you want to register by mail, you can. You want to vote at your registrar of voters, you can start doing that now. I was in San Francisco a week ago, and they have already set up their sections and their poll places in the registrar of voters offices so that some of you can go in and register to vote at that particular time, those who are in the Bay Area. And so is true with LA and a number of other places. So voting is occurring right now for those who want to vote in person versus those who want to vote by mail. Keep in mind the last day to vote is September 14th. It's the last day to vote, which means if you're going to mail it in, your mail-in ballot has to be postmarked by September 14th. We give, I think, 7 days for the ballot to come to basically get to us, but it has to be postmarked by the 14th of September. So we want to make sure that people understand that. It also, and so if you mail it in, you have a number of days for it to get there, but make sure it's postmarked by the 14th. If you're going to go and vote in person, make sure you're there by September the 14th. Voting begins at 7 a.m. in the morning and goes to 8 p.m. in the evening. There's a Voters' Bill of Rights that says if you are in line at 8 o'clock, they have to let you vote. So if you get there before 8 o'clock and if you get there at 7:59 and there's a line, don't go away. Stay, because they have to, at 8 o'clock, they have to see who's in line, and you have a right to vote as long as you're in line before 8 o'clock that evening. So we try to make it as agreeable as possible for everyone to be able to vote in person, by mail, by voting ballot boxes, all those kinds of things that are there. And we hope that generates a great turnout for the election that's there.
The most important thing that's on my mind is that every single day between now and September 14th is an important day. This is unlike any election you've ever seen. It's so quick, it's so short. And the difference between mobilizing communities that are not always at the center of decision making, every day matters. And every question matters, even if it's a bizarre question. And I really love Dr. Weber's answers to these questions, very straightforward and clear. Those can be provided, but even questions you think might be just completely off the wall, might be keeping somebody from participating. It's almost like the whole census effort, the whole vaccination effort has been telescoped into a few weeks. And by September 15th, it's too late. It's coming upon us. And I look at the calendar every day on this, and I'm kind of urgently moved on this.
I want to encourage everyone to get a ballot and to vote. If you can't figure out number 2, vote for the number 1. That one is relatively simple. Do you or do you not want to recall the governor? If you don't know anything about the other folks, don't worry about it. Do you want to recall the governor? That is an extremely important question that's asked, and it drives everything else. And so don't feel like you don't have enough information to do it. Do it. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're getting the record numbers coming back, is that it's not as confusing as our other elections. We can make it confusing by thinking about it over and over and over and over and trying to figure out these 46 people. Most of them who I shouldn't say, yeah, I guess I know 2 or 3 of them on there, but most of them, I have no idea who they are. And so as a result, be sure you vote for number 1, yes or no on the recall, because that is critical, that is important. And the flaws in the recall system, we will hopefully resolve them with the legislature as soon as this recall is over, in terms of the things that we think are really important, that are really reflective of what California deserves. But I want to encourage everyone, every relative, every cousin, every friend, everybody you have, we have sent everyone a ballot. Make sure they turn in that ballot and vote whether or not they want to recall the governor, and if they have a choice, to identify that choice. But it's a simple election. Let's not overcomplicate it. Let's just get it done. We have 2 weeks to get it done, and let's do that.